Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as we've been saying, look, the outrage machine, all about keeping people all bunched up in the panties and angry and incapable of looking at reason. And this is kind of where we are in this moment, as all of the crimes are being unfurled and we're seeing more and more what came out of the previous administration. The allegations, the insanity, the things that our right-wing outrage machine has done over the years, well, they're ramping it up. And here to share some thoughts on where we are, where this all could take us, and why haven't the Democrats steeled up and begun to fight back, I've asked Reed Galen to come talk with us. Reed is a co-founder of the Lincoln Project. You can check out their stuff at lincolnproject.org, I believe. Reed, thanks for taking time for us.
No, thanks, Rick, as always, for having me.
So, I'm looking at this moment. I'm watching all of the stories coming out, this new Hillary Spygate stuff, which is, wow, it kind of reminds me of one of those 1980s kind of spy novels with great graphic details, but nowhere close to reality. And, it's catching on with that segment because I'm getting hammered with comments and emails and I'm a Clinton defender. Look, I'm not a huge Clinton fan, but when something's BS, it's BS.
Well, I think that's right. And I mean, it also shows you that, that Secretary Clinton is a perennial favorite of the right wing and radical media. She always provides them, regardless of what she's done today, yesterday, or a year ago, fodder because look, there's a reason, Rick, they, made a slogan out of lock her up in regards to Mrs. Clinton. As Kevin McCarthy noted several years ago, the entire Benghazi 33 hearings over 3 years that they did when they had control of Congress was just about hobbling her presidential ambitions. So they never run out of newsprint or film to go after her.
And look, I've been saying this for years. None of this is news to our audience. None of this is a surprise. We understand the game. We see it coming. My problem is it doesn't appear to me that Democrats fight back on this stuff hard enough. We're at a moment where maybe you're going to agree with me, maybe you're not, that this could be the last really fair and open election of my lifetime. And yet I don't see the Democrats with any sense of urgency. I don't see them with any sense of message. Even their own polling says that people view them as elitist and preachy and all of that stuff. I want to see someone come out with their dukes balled up and ready to swing.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, look, Rick, there are glimpses of hope. There was just a story, I think, that just posted right before I came on the air with you that said that there are a lot of Democratic organizations that are focused on Democratic governor's races and Democratic secretaries of state races that do understand the fight, that do understand the peril that democracy is in. And that's going to be the fulcrum around which they fight this year, which is, music to our ears, because we believe that this is the fight of our age. As you know, Rick, like none of the rest of it happens. Whatever your policy issue is, whatever your pet issue is, none of it happens without a free and fair government and electorate. And frankly, a two-party system that wants to govern, even if it differs on policy. And so what I think we see before us now is that there are people waking up to this. But one thing I want to say about message too, Rick, is and this is something I think you and your listeners probably know inherently, is that messaging is devised from belief. You have to believe in something to be able to talk about it coherently. And I think that's one thing that Democrats are contending with right now is that you have a divided party. I don't think it's 50-50 necessarily. I think the establishment wing is bigger than the progressive wing. But the progressive wing is 100% pure in its beliefs and 100% willing to scream about it. And the establishment doesn't quite know what to do with it. And we saw that on the Republican side. In my own experience, the difference is on the Republican side now the inmates run the asylum.
So let's unpack that a bit, because I'm somebody who wants to get things done. I've said this for years. I'm not a cause head. I believe in organized labor. I'm not the mayor or prime minister of Wokistan. I want to get things done. I want to make people's lives better. How do you not have a scenario where, as the right continued to go extreme, radical right, how do you make sure that you don't completely lose the other side, with the left going way off the beaten path, where the majority of people are going, well, what choices do we have?
No, I think that's absolutely right, and you hit the nail on the head, which is what we see is like if you put two magnets backwards towards one another, right? They push against each other, they push away from each other, and I think as the right has gone more radical, there's a segment of the left that has moved out further outside the mainstream as well. I think the difference is that the establishment Democrats have been unable or unwilling to stand up to their own party and say, these are not the things that A, we believe in necessarily, or B, let's be clear, if you want to win elections, there are things you must do, must say, because they're out of step with the broad, swath of the American electorate. Purity's fine, right? When it comes to loving a football team or something. Purity in politics rarely works. And I think, Rick, to your point about getting things done, I think it was no less, I've got on my bookcase here, my bookshelf here. Where the hell is it? Oh, I don't know. But, Rules for Radicals, right? Who says, if you're trying to get to 100 and you start at 0 and you get to 30, you didn't fail 70% of the time. You're 30% ahead of where you started. And I think that's one thing that, again, I think it's sometimes easy for those purified activists to say, we want all or we'll take nothing. That's easy. That's the easy way out, because you can say, they didn't give me what I wanted. I'm going to take my ball and go home. You and I, Rick, know that's not how the real world works.
No, and a perfect example of that is the infrastructure bill. I was in favor of getting the bipartisan infrastructure bill pushed through, but there was a moment where we would have gotten nothing because they were trying to tie the Build Back Better plan and the infrastructure bill, which at the beginning I'm like, this is a good idea, it's a good negotiation tactic, but at some point you got to get something done. And knowing that eventually the Build Back Better plan was dead on arrival. I didn't realize at the time it would be Joe Manchin to kill it, but that's kind of in that line.
Well, I think that's right, but I think, well, first, I mean, we now have proof in the terms of, I guess, a memo he wrote to Senator Schumer sometime last fall or late summer that said, "I'm not for Build Back Better unless it gets to this number." And Rick, as you know, in the getting things done sphere, people in Washington love to throw around numbers. It's 3.5 trillion, it's 2.1 trillion, it's 1.3 trillion. I mean, this is all monopoly money that we're leaving the bill to our kids, our grandkids, and our great grandkids. But it's always easier to spend somebody else's money. But what does it mean if you can chop $1.8 trillion off of something as a negotiating tactic? Did you really know what it is you were trying to do in the first place? And I think they started with a number as opposed to an objective, and said, what is it we're trying to do here, and let's assign a number to that. I think that they probably could have found some way to get Manchin on board, but then he became the punching bag that everybody just got on board with. And he also, frankly, Rick, gave them an excuse not to get something done.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this, because I'm hearing a lot of people saying, well, the left's got to learn the lessons that the right learned years ago, because when the right wants something, they figure out how to get everybody in line and move their agenda. When they take power, they get the things that are important to them: Supreme Court justices, tax cuts. They get what is in their base, what is in their message interest. As where the left, where Democrats don't. They don't drive the steamroller well.
Well, this is true, but it's a fundamentally different worldview and a different makeup in the two parties. I mean, even when I was a Republican, to your point, Rick, if the president of the United States was a Republican and he said something, regardless, it could have been gibberish. Every Republican member of Congress, the Senate, local Republican official, the conservative press would have said these were words handed down by God.
Exactly.
Right. Joe Biden goes to Atlanta last month and gives a very strong speech on voting rights and democracy. And what happens? People are like, oh, well, Democrats are like, he shouldn't have invoked Bull Connor. I think he crossed a line. Like, what are you talking about? He didn't cross any lines. If anything, he was strong. And that's to your point, Rick, earlier, is I think Democratic voters do want to see signs of strength. I don't think yet. And listen, I talk to a lot of Democrats too, more than I ever thought I would in my life. They want strength. They want shows of strength and backbone and steely-eyed determination to do the things necessary to win elections. The problem is that sometimes winning elections is a tough business. the American political system, Rick, as you know, has been ugly since the day it started. Right? We are not an easygoing political people. Never have been, and we're probably as bad as we've ever been. But the idea now that there's one side that's totally anti-democratic and one side that's too genteel to understand it and put up the fight puts us in a very bad position.
It absolutely does. You listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're with Reed Galen. Reed is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project. You can check out their website at lincolnproject.us. We'll get links out on social media how you can do that. If you got a thought, question, comment for Reed, give us a yell. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Now, to that point, I've said for years that working class voters like me, want to see a party who's going to, in a street fight, going to ball up their digits and get in there and take a couple of punches, not just offer to hold my coat. And sadly, what we've seen for too long is a party willing to hold the coat or, turning and going in the other direction. And we're in a moment right now where this is a defining moment. Because I think I've talked with other Lincoln Project people about this. The message isn't policy now. The message is, do you believe in democracy or do you not? Do you believe in the rule of law or do you not? Do you believe in our institutions and this country or not? Because the other side, your former party of which you helped create, they want to burn the damn thing down.
Well, yeah, that's right. And I mean, that's always the ironic piece of authoritarian movements are the ones that we see out of the Republican Party now, which is, it's not surprising. In fact, it is the norm to have the working class on their side, mixed with the country club, the super wealthy set, right? We've seen this in history, really just even the last 100 years. It's not an unusual phenomenon. Democrats seeded the working class of the middle of the country far too fast, in the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s, and now they've been pushed out to the coasts. But Rick, the one thing I will say again in my conversations is there are Democrats in rural areas. There are working class Democrats. There are church-going Democrats, but no one talks to them. No one asks them for their vote, and frankly, no one speaks the language that they speak. I mean, there are parts of the country where you're working class Democrat for a long time, you're a working class Republican, right? If you're standing on a road crew, maybe you argue about politics, but the way you see the world is probably not significantly different from the other guy. The only thing you probably both agree on is that, like, the lady driving by in the Range Rover with the white dog in her lap has no conception of how you live. And I think that that's a part that we really need to understand is there are votes for Democrats out there, but Democratic candidates have to go ask for them, and groups like us are going to go find them and help talk to them.
And that's a good thing. It's the reason we started this program over 16 years ago. The world that me and my truck driver buddies were looking at, and the positions we were taking were very different, given the fact that, look, truck drivers sit in a truck all day long and they're consuming, Hannity, Limbaugh, the whole 9 yards of rage machine, products. And I actually had a union guy tell me we'd make more money if there were no union here. That's how far down the road this guy had gotten. And over the years, I haven't seen the kind of counterbalance of message. There are people saying, oh, we need the fairness doctrine again. No, we need people who are willing to stand up and fight for what they believe in. And that, to me, is the simple answer.
Well, I think that's right. And I think especially, too, especially with private sector unions, there is, I think, a lot of opportunity there for them. And Rick, we're seeing this, whether or not it's at Starbucks, whether or not it's at Amazon or elsewhere. Or the fact that there are people who just won't work for $12 an hour anymore, right? That in and of itself is sort of a mass unionization, even if it's not organized, which is, the power of the individual worker has ebbed over the last 40 years. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But I think now what you're starting to see is that there's a turning of the page, but the Republican Party is never going to turn that page, right? They're never going to. And so I think the Democrats have a real opportunity to do that, but they have to get away from being beholden to the same big corporate interest that, frankly, Republicans are.
Yeah, no, you're spot on accurate. And for me, there's a spot right there where I think unity can happen. There are a number of issues that I believe that we can bring the country and unite the country. And I believe they're working class issues. On Election Day 2020, and I've said this a bunch of times, I wasn't arguing over who won or who lost yet because I knew it was going to take time. I was out leading a strike of 55 workers who 3/4 of them voted for Trump. I was out there with them doing that because they were fighting what was the right fight: better wages, hours, conditions, better opportunities. These are the kind of things that I think we should be focusing on, along with our trade policies and bringing jobs and recreating a national security manufacturing powerhouse in this country. Those are areas I think that Republican, Democrat, Independent, doesn't matter. We can bring those people together with that kind of a message and agenda.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think that, I'm not an expert enough on trade, globalization, any of that stuff to be credible on it probably. But I mean, to your point about individual union members, I think there was a story out of Texas today, Rick, where I think after 5.5 years off the job, there's a steel workers union at an oil refinery in East Texas where, they're finally going to get back to work. That's a long time to be out of work, as you know. And Texas is a right to work state. Anyway, but these guys somehow managed to still have their union. And so, it took a while, but finally, I think it's an Exxon refinery or an Exxon Chevron, whatever it is, Exxon Mobil refinery said, okay, let's find a way to do this. And I think that, we have to get away from and even Jamie Dimon, right, who runs JP Morgan, one of the biggest banks in the world, said, like, we have to get away from the shareholder value thing and back to, like, why do people want to work for us in the first place? And I think that unions can be, again, especially private sector unions can and should have a part in that. And Democrats shouldn't be afraid of it.
No, let me ask you this: as a former Republican, how hard is it to say that?
I lived in California for 10 years, so I got pretty leavened on that.
Okay.
But I'll say this: is that I was never an anti-union guy. I wasn't a very good Republican either. But I'll be honest with you too, Rick, that I have not been a union worker. I've never belonged to a union. And so frankly, it has been something that I haven't been really in touch with, to be honest with you. And I think a lot of Republicans are like that. It's just, that's my point, is that, like, Republicans are vacuuming up working class voters, and the people who are running and raising money and spending that money have little to no contact with the people with whom.
That's an excellent point. Last line of questioning I've got for you, looking into our north. You see this trucker for freedom rally that the
Sure.
right is now all in on. When there were Black Lives Matter protests, they were passing legislation to run people down in the streets, but now they're all in because, well, it's tyranny to ensure that people coming back from over the border from the U.S. back into Canada are vaccinated. I'm curious where you come down on where this is all going.
Well, I think it's a reminder that the right-wing rage and media complex is incredibly effective and efficient at moving a message. I don't know who organized these things. I don't know if it was some guy on Facebook. I don't know if it was a guy in his cab who had it or whatever. But certainly once there was a little bit of a nucleus, other people, whether or not it was Facebook or American donors, got involved. I think it is one of those things, though, Rick, where it is, I think it's a little too hard to understand. I mean, most Canadians, as I understand it, live, pretty close to the American border, but most Americans do not live that close to the Canadian border. And most Americans can't really understand, okay, well, wait, you've got to have this to go to Canada. Okay, well, it's their country, fine. But what you see they're trying to do is ultimately the goal is to try and connect the truckers to the supply chain, right? And you can't get what you want because Joe Biden, blah, 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 blah. Well, the truth is, I mean, nobody's going without toilet paper or food, right? Nobody had an unhappy Christmas because they couldn't get what they wanted or needed. And so it's just one more thing I heard you coming back from break. They've got to consistently just jab that adrenal gland of their viewers and their listeners, because I think without it, frankly, Rick, they're so probably overwrought emotionally and psychologically based on how amped up they've been for 5 years, that without that continuous stream of vitriol, they'd probably all just collapse.
Which brings me to this interesting poll that I saw Gallup conducted. And it's one of these weird things. It said 17% of Americans are satisfied with the way things are going in the U.S., which is a near low, 40-year low. And yet 85% of people are satisfied with the way things are going in their personal life, which is a 40-year high.
Right.
How do you? It's one of these things. How can you be so down on one part but so high on another?
Well, this is not an unusual phenomenon. It's the same thing if you ask people like, "What's your opinion of Congress?" and they're like, "It has." Congress typically has a lower approval rating than most sexually transmitted diseases. But if you ask, "Do you like your member of Congress?" even if they don't know who they are, they say, "Oh yes, I love them." So that's not unusual. But I blame it on social media. I blame it on, on the look again, the effectiveness of the Tucker Carlsons and the Hannitys and the Foxes of the world to just, try and convince everybody that the world is coming to an end. So that's not an unusual thing. And I think actually, it's a good note that you picked up, Rick, which is people are like, oh, well, in a midterm election, a president with bad approval ratings, he'll lose seats in the House, lose seats in the Senate, whatever. That might be true. But if those Democratic candidates in those important races can say, look at your life, look what's happening in your life, in your community, and sort of, get the clouds to part a little bit, I think there's cautious optimism.
Yeah, the old Ronald Reagan, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And clearly, I think people are right now. But Reed, I appreciate the time. Great talking with you. Good stuff as always. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
No, thanks, Rick, as always. Have a good night.
You as well. Our good friend Reed Galen. Make sure you check out their website, lincolnproject.us. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at the work that they do there. All good stuff.